This is a big one. This is not a conversation that we've actually pre-chatted to each other about.
Well, so we did a little bit.
You did? Oh, okay, fine. Berit, off you go. What, tell me, no, seriously, tell me, you and I had the conversation a year ago about, obviously, the rise of, this was all before the Cambridge Analytica scandal had fully exploded, I would say, at that time. And it was incredibly illuminating back then. And I felt like, you know, new ground for me was certainly being forged when we had that conversation here. We've moved on another year, and the scale of the challenge that we're facing, perhaps just in terms of those social media platforms, and we can go much wider than that, and I'm sure we will today, but where have we got to in this conversation? I don't know if there's an easy way of summarizing that.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, one of the things that we've seen is a lot of attention paid to what happened during the 2016 election. And over the last year, I actually co-founded 2 companies that are focused on identifying and responding to information warfare generally. And so I've done a lot of research personally on information warfare. And what we've found, which I think most people aren't necessarily aware of or think that much about in their ongoing lives, is that it didn't stop, you know, when Trump was elected, actually. It's been ongoing. He actually hired Cambridge Analytica for his re-election campaign, which was started the day he was inaugurated. And in fact, he's actually not the only person using information warfare, clearly. But it's really interesting to see, you know, we do a lot of, you know, we are constantly researching current trends. So as things come up, we'll kind of look into them and see what's going on online. And I actually have some of them to show you guys here today. But I think the biggest, like, misunderstood thing about this is that anytime there's a big cultural conversation going on, that conversation is being amplified, specifically, especially on Twitter, by at least 50% bots, right? And so
50%.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what we found across, you know, the Colin Kaepernick controversy when Kaepernick came out this year and supported with this big Nike ad. There was this huge controversy that was kind of created on Twitter around this. You know, that was created by, I mean, the general strategy is like there's a bot swarm. It comes in and it really increases the conversation around a specific topic, and then
the Russian bots, who were they?
It's, you know, it's a little difficult to tell. I can show you. I'm going to show you a couple of the kinds of things to look for in this space. But so well, this is actually something that happened this year. So back in February, we ran a scenario planning game in San Francisco for a group of about 40 people. And that scenario planning game was designed to help them understand information warfare and technology generally and how that might actually you know, affect our next election cycle. So they were broken down into these groups, and everyone was playing a specific group. There was, you know, the Mercers were a group, the unions were a group, Black Lives Matter was a group, and it was, you were all playing a team and trying to figure out what's going to happen in the next election cycle. So this is a story by Jane Meyer that broke, I believe this was a couple months later, but this story was written about Rebecca Mercer taking a parlor game to her Vail ski vacation. So we started reading the story. It turns out the rules were exactly our rules. It was an interesting experience. And so we reached out. This was all portrayed as, you know, the game, her using the game to mock the fact that she had been gaming democracy, essentially. So she was making a game of the fact that she had made a game of politics and elections. So we reached out to Gizmodo and kind of corrected the record a little bit with Kate Conger. And so as a result of that, we're actually, you know, this is just a little microcosm of how weird things get online. But we're doing this game next week in Chicago with Peter Sagal and Max Temkin, who created Cards Against Humanity, for a group of about 40 people. If anyone's going to be in Chicago and wants to come, let me know. But so that's just like a little like weird microcosm. But so here's what this looks like. So this is a search for Mueller between the last 90 days. I did this morning. And you can see all of these spikes are instances where mentions of Mueller on Twitter go up. The biggest one is about 520,000. That would have been in around August 1st, right? So here's the same search over the same time period for Brett Kavanaugh. And you can see that peaked at about 1.7 million people just right around the time he was confirmed. And so what this looks like is we can then like narrow down into each of these time periods and try to start to see a little bit more like what's going on here, like what are the actual messages that are being distributed and who are the people behind them. So this is actually just the last 2,000 tweets sorted by author, but according to bot volume. So what you're seeing in this graph is just the last 2,000 tweets on Twitter, but they're representative essentially of that time period. And so the pink dots are all bots. The white dots are actually humans. And the orange dots and the yellow dots are suspected bots or accounts with bot followers, essentially. And so here's what that looks like. The three biggest messages that went out were from Raw Story, Funder, Real Donald Trump, Jamie Roche, Zoe Tillman. These are the accounts that were most retweeted, essentially. And so Real Donald Trump, in this case, so Raw Story and Funder in this case were actually 75% bots. 75%, I think it's 70%. But Real Donald Trump was 59% bots. And you can start to kind of like drill in on this a little bit, right? So this is just from the last 2,000 tweets, so from this morning. This is the message that was most amplified by Donald. That made up most of that bot activity. And you can see, this is just from yesterday, I think. Yeah, so these are a couple of the accounts that are identified as bots, right? So this is someone who looks like a person, a regular person. Her screen name is @JazzyMom. She's got the Trump kind of hat on. This person actually could be a real person, but you can see 32.7 thousand tweets and only 1,200 followers. So that's highly unlikely that a human could actually do that. Or if it is, it's someone who is actually being paid or spending all of their time putting out messaging. And if you scroll through her Twitter feed, all of her tweets are essentially, they're all to do with conservative politics, and they're all pushing different conservative thinkers. So here's one more. 17,000 tweets and only 133 followers. This guy is apparently making the wife the richest woman in Hawaii. He's a chairman in Hawaii, or a chairman of Hawaii, Committee to Distribute Democrat Wealth, which may or may not exist, probably doesn't. But again, all of his tweets are the same thing. They're all very much on message. You can see kind of the same type of stuff.
So the takeaway of this is that it's sort of, Twitter is like pro-am wrestling when it comes to political discourse. I mean,
exactly.
You think you're watching something real, but you're actually...
It's completely fake. Not completely fake, but it's very, very augmented.
Valeriy, I want to bring you in. To what extent in Ukraine is any conversation happening on Twitter or Facebook? I mean, given presumably the level of intervention from bots is going to be perhaps even higher than Berit's metrics here.
I saw that, and I think in Ukraine our bots goes further, not just stop on that. I give you my personal example. 2 weeks ago, they create my fake account in Facebook. And they absolutely copy of my account. All the information, all data that I'm fulfilled there, the same. Just one mistake. I graduated from the university in the Soviet time. And this was Russian-Ukrainian language at a different, so only one letter change. And I understand this is Russian speaker guy. So they create this fake account, and immediately works on that. On behalf of myself, try to make the messages. That's a problem. If we have bots, they just comment something or try to change the mind of the people. But if it's public person, it's a make it damage, real damage. And we have this experience.
So does anybody trust or, to what extent is life lived through Facebook or Twitter in Ukraine, given that degree of manipulation?
Frankly, sorry for the terrible, because now if you are not put the first in Facebook immediately after the news happened and something happened, you'll lose. Yeah. You'll lose in next 1 hour.
Because the bots will have beaten.
Because somebody comments in another way. That, for example, I met yesterday with governor of Utah. And it was a brilliant meeting with important issues. And governor tweet, there's a very good meeting with ambassador of Ukraine. Immediately I find the same bot that's comment my tweet. So that's in this tweet, I saw the group of people. It's not not only bots. It's people who is make information attack. Goes with me around the United States and check where you are, and comment that. In Ukraine, if president, prime minister, every politician now have their own tweet or Facebook, it's in the United States. But the difference, we are in the state of war. And that's why sometimes if you some comments about war or about very important issue for Ukrainians from bots, it's make a damage, it's a huge problem. And how to overcome that, I don't know, I just want to listen how to do it.
Steve, I want to bring you in. I mean, obviously one response is the one that you've come up with, which is to do with, well, I don't know, talk me through this, because obviously here we are talking about fake accounts and you're effectively inviting regular citizens to create their own fake account to protect themselves.
Yeah, I think it's important to put all of this in context. The things like fake news and sort of information warfare, these are not new concepts. They go back in the US to the Federalist Papers. Ben Franklin was a huge purveyor of fake news.
But they've been weaponized by the...
But they have been weaponized, and the volume and velocity is really the danger here. I think the thing that you're seeing with Twitter and Facebook is the ability to scale to millions of people in a second is really the scary part. And I think that in kind of our approach, I take a very skeptical view of any organization with a large amount of power and influence telling me what is fake and what is real. It's just very, very difficult to kind of place my trust in that entity. I believe in individual discernment and control. I think it's important to educate people from a civics perspective, whether it's in the Ukraine or the United States or any other country. And I think it's also important to give people more control over the types of information they want to expose themselves to.
Just to remind people, the product you're selling is effectively to offer people a proxy so that they can safely go online or, well, wherever.
Yeah, it's a digital proxy. It's just you with a different set of credentials. It would be sort of similar to today I'm the worst dressed on the panel, but tomorrow I might put a suit on, right? It's still the same guy. It's just, different context. Well, different characteristics.
Yeah, and I would say, to be fair, so Anonyme Labs is really focused on a little bit of a different problem. So the other side of information warfare that we saw, which has been, I think, tamped down quite a bit, at least on Facebook, since the election, was the ability to target people, right, by your demographics and by the huge database of information that is out there about you from data brokers, from larger search platforms. And so your product actually is really solving that problem as opposed to like the misinformation problem.
Yeah, I would suggest though that you've got a problem with brands like Facebook and Google where they control, Facebook controls 2 billion, individuals' news, right? And certain generations are getting 70 to 80% of their entire news feed from one company. That's pretty dangerous. Right? And so I think part of the problem here is you've got to give people the ability to control what they want to see, what they want to investigate. You're even seeing sort of advertisements now for, I think it's smart news, right? Which is trying to give you, sort of balanced views, which I think, that's not a bad thing. But I think the problem in the world today with information warfare is, and certainly we've seen it in the Ukraine as a prime example, but even in the United States, if you listen to the head of Homeland Security yesterday, she talked about the fact that the #1 problem in the elections coming up is not Russia, it's China. Because China and the US are engaged in a battle royale over trade. And so, you've got this new phenomena in information warfare where you've got third-party entities that are coming into sort of sovereign nations and actually trying to swing people's perceptions with these crazy, sort of volume and velocity problems. We've talked to people at Anonyme in DC about sort of, kind of, if you will, radical tactics to kind of create friction. Now, I come from the cybersecurity world. My background is all about, I used to be the surveillance guy. I was sitting in the 3-letter agencies trying to prevent China from getting in. The #1 tack and strategy for that is introduce friction. So, you know, one of the things we should do, just like in the old days where they used to shut off the liquor stores and the bars during election day, maybe we need to like turn off social media for 3 days before elections, just to slow down the volume, right? Call your politicians. I mean, that is such, you know, and you know, we've had this debate about, you know, First Amendment in the United States. That doesn't apply here. But you just have to turn down. The volume and velocity is the problem that we have to address.
Well, I mean, there are rules around the world, right, about making campaigning illegal the day before or during the day of a vote. So in a sense, it's merely a small extension of of that you're describing, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, to Berit's point, like that is how you, I think, tackle this problem. You know?
Well, although, I mean, to be fair, I think volume and velocity is one big part of it. It means that these kinds of fake identities can spread a lot more quickly. But even if we weren't all on social media, even if we just had network television, right? If we reverted back to those days, we are living in an age now where you can create a fake video of someone and it's unclear whether that person is real or not. And even if they're not real and it's a little bit like it's kind of obvious that they're not real, you know, 75% of people will believe it anyways.
I agree 100%, but I would say that that's not new, right? The Gulf of Tonkin was something, if you study history and you know a lot about Vietnam War, like that was used to sort of escalate a war in the United States that we should not have been engaged in. And 50 years later, we figured out that that didn't happen, right? So we've always been shaped. Advertisement, you know, I'm a huge fan of Mad Men. We've always been shaped by those entities and those channels that we look at. And I don't think we should be less skeptical, whether it's old TV and, you know, pick your favorite, you know, news channel. I can't stand any of them. But we have to sort of create a little bit of, you know, we have to slow it down. And I think we have to combine that with people need to just take more active control over their information diet. If we spent more time on the kinds of information sources we look at, compared to the type of food we pick at Whole Foods, we would be so much better, right? It's like the information diet that I think we have to really focus on.
I agree 100% because I make my choice. Now, after 3 years here, Discovery my main channel. So it's not fake news in Discovery. But I want to ask you about another thing. We discussed social networks and new technologies, but you Americans face the old era technology and face this new approach. I give you an example. We have calls to the Congress, to the Senate and House from so-called pranks, Russian, I think connected with Russian intelligence guys, who have a great skills and can speak languages. And they call on behalf of the government, for example, on the government of Ukraine, or the Prime Minister of Ukraine, to the congressmen, senators, just using the traditional way, phone calls. And many times, despite I meet with the security of the Congress, just make the mechanism how to respond that, they didn't yet. And one significant example, one of the senators, very good friend of Ukraine, week before I prepared him, he said it could be calls from prankers from Moscow. He said, okay, thank you so much. After that, they called him, and in the final of this conversation, he said, okay, thank you. I understand everything that you told me. Ambassador prepared me. Could be calls for pranks. It was prank. So that's why most important education is not about the food that you choose, but also about your mind, about how you works with that. So that's another problem, and we are not ready yet for that.
Berit, also, guys, if you have any questions, step up. There has been a suggestion, I remember in the UK, around the time of the Cambridge Analytica stuff coming out earlier this year, people were talking about pointing the finger, of course, at Facebook very heavily and saying we have to basically break up a monopoly because it's starting to look like that. Do you think there is any role in that kind of... Do you think that would help in any way?
So, I mean, Facebook is a very interesting example because as Steve, I think it was Steve, was saying was, the majority of people in my generation get their news primarily from Facebook or Twitter, right? And so when you look at that and you look at the fact that it reaches, I think now 2.2 billion people in the world, there has never been a company with that much information power before. And I think they have made strides since the election, but they've done a very poor job at taking responsibility for, or being able to, foresee what the impact of their platform will be. It's clear, it's through multiple statements that Mark Zuckerberg has made after the election that he was in denial, if nothing else. At best case, and so I think when we think about Facebook, I don't know if breaking it up is the right way to go, but I think sure, of course it would help, but as would also, some additional government oversight.
I suppose the other point to make is that during the Brazilian election recently, we had these amazing reports of kind of stories being disseminated on WhatsApp, which of course has no curation at all. There would be no way of stopping these things. These are closed networks of people spreading complete lies on a regular basis, and that's like exponentially more scary in a way, isn't it? Because there literally is no way of monitoring things like that.
Well, just to tag on that, one of my favorite comments from folks is, "Oh, I'm totally off Facebook. I just go on Instagram now."
Yeah.
Right. So one of the problems is Facebook has 2 of the largest social media platforms in addition to Facebook, right? So I think one of the
And by the way, WhatsApp's founders just left because they disagreed with the ethics decisions.
So you know that. Yeah. One of the issues here is they have platforms that people don't realize are all sort of wrapped up into the main mothership, and I think that any company, and this is not anti-Facebook, but any company that controls an inordinate amount of any commodity, whether it's oil, telecommunications, or thought, has to be looked at through, in the US we have the Sherman Antitrust Act. It's served us well for a long time. You really have to look at it through that lens and say, is there an inordinate amount of power being exerted there? I'm not advocating the breakup at all, and I'm not, I sort of agree. I'm not sure that would change it, but we certainly need to take a look, at least have a conversation.
Yes, ma'am.
Dozier, it sounds, some of the things that you've mentioned or advocated, perhaps breaking up Facebook, perhaps making sure that things that are being shared are accurate, sounds rather authoritarian. But it seems like the heart of what you're getting to is news literacy, media literacy, that a lot of people lack, so they propagate or take in and believe things that they shouldn't. How would you spread news literacy?
I would actually push back on the fact that it's authoritarian. I mean, if you think about our, our water utilities, our phone services, have always had a large amount of government oversight for that exact reason.
Antitrust laws are pretty standard.
But that being said, so there have been some really, I think Europe has actually done a pretty good job of promoting media literacy. And I think honestly the first step to promoting media literacy is promoting literacy of the media. Most media in the United States, for example, don't really understand what's going on here, like the things that I showed you today. And it's not necessarily a part of how people think about running newsrooms, right? So, we're constantly trying to break news stories, and get out ahead and be the person that's reporting on these things without actually giving the right amount of context to our readers or our viewers or whatever that might be about, so yes, there was this huge document dump that just happened, but let's not just report on the document dump, let's report on why this was strategically leaked right before the election, right? That didn't happen. We only report on the document dump.
My pushback would be that a lot of us journalists learned from being used as tools in the 2016 election. So I think there is more thought that goes into, I know I've not reported a bunch of stuff that Anonymous has sent me because I can't verify it any other way. So I missed scoops, but each news organization is now weighing that.
I just think, on news literacy, I think the line between news literacy and dogma is a very short line. And I think the danger in saying that we need better news literacy is that, well, it depends on who's in power. And that becomes the news literacy dogma of the moment. Now, I think that part of the challenge that the media needs to step up to is, and I hate to use this term because it's co-opted by one particular organization, but it actually has real meaning, is a fair-minded view of a particular event or a particular person or a particular policy. And I think that involves, you know, not 90+% on any side of, you know, the sort of, you know, red and blue aisle. I think part of the challenge you're having today is the reaction, I get it, of being manipulated in the 2016 election is to sort of overcompensate. Instead of taking a step back and saying, look, you can't report on a viewpoint that is 90% on anything and be considered fair-minded. That's what news literacy is about, is reporting the facts. And I think that's the challenge we're finding ourselves. It's a delicate debate, I get it, and it's probably controversial here, but I think we have to have that conversation.
So my last thing would be, I would say then go to AP, Reuters, or BBC where they have that specific rule, as opposed to other media outlets that have made a market choice to have a point of view. So.
Yeah, I actually disagree with that a little bit, Steve. I think one of the reasons that we are, you know, in the political situation that we are is because journalists for years have been trained to be objective and to report both sides evenly. And there's been a lack of, you know, willingness, or like it just wasn't the way that we were trained to you know, really call a spade necessarily. And because of the way that advertising and advertising revenue have driven journalism, it's really, you know, actually moved a lot of journalists away from that model.
I definitely agree that advertising has worked the sort of news room a little bit, because, you know, in the days where you weren't driven by revenue and the need for revenue, you could be a little bit more independent. I think today ad revenue plays a huge part in driving news stories and news organizations.
And perhaps social media does as well, because they actually set the agenda to some extent, don't they? I mean, rage can perpetuate stories.
I mean, and that's actually that's a part of the strategy. So the surge of the bot surge that you guys saw is like, once that kind of thing starts trending, then media essentially like has to cover it, right?
Yeah. The story is the trending. One more question, because we're about out of time.
Obviously, this is a really big threat to our system of governance. And is there an opportunity when you have a digital trust issue for blockchain in this instance to help solve this problem?
Oh, I love that question. So first of all, you know, I'm very conscious of blockchain hype, and I'm sort of very skeptical of it. But I think the thing that the blockchain embodies, and I could care less about the crypto effort, it's more about sort of the tech, is blockchain. For the first time, I think, in human history, we've got this transparency, this immutability, this verifiability that stands separate from any entity ability to control it. And I think blockchain is leveraging this move to decentralization, whether it's the simple stuff like, I don't want to pay the cable cartel for 500 channels, I'm going to go buy Netflix, or whether it's, you know, I don't trust the banks because they almost brought the world, you know, to you know, a halt in 2008 financial crisis. I think the challenge with blockchain, and it's super early, like it's not even the first inning in my opinion, is, you know, you're going to have all the performance and scalability stuff that the nerds are going to work out. We'll fix that. That's not a reason to say it's not real. It's really, you've got to separate the snake oil, right? People have a bad business model and they sort of attach blockchain to it, and then, you know, they get some funding, versus the stuff that's really going to sustain. I think the company, I think it's Titan Seal that I heard about yesterday. This is going to be a really, really viable business where you've got, you know, I still have a paper birth certificate, right? Like that's going to stop. Blockchain's going to sort of, you know, completely disrupt that. And I think you're going to see more and more of that momentum building.
What would that mean in terms of social media?
Well, I mean, blockchain essentially would enable you to be able to verify whether those accounts that I showed you in real time are in fact people that they say they are.
Forced identification of individuals on Twitter. Every single account holder would have to somehow prove.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, right now we have a little blue check mark, but that's a little bit arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
And so
I don't have one.
I don't have one, no. But I am a real person, and so I think it's a very powerful tool.
Valeriy?
Any technology will stop the lie from the politician, and that's a must question. So it's a tools means we can prevent something, but in this case, we should go ahead of them. I mean, I also a politician, but please find the technology that's be ahead of us.
Okay, we're going to have to call a halt there. This conversation could go on all day, I know, but grab us in the breaks if you need to.
Thank you.